So hi guys, there's a new chapter, and a new season of the beginning after the end. If you haven't watched the last episode of the previous season, make sure to check it out first so you can understand what happens next. At the beginning of the episode, we see Arthur Lei Win. He looks intense and serious, staring ahead while thinking about Sylvie, who has been possessed by Agrona Vritra, the ruler of Alacria. On the other side, Sylvie stands with completely red eyes and a faint smirk, clearly under Agrona's control. Realizing the situation, Arthur quickly raises his hand, gathering air from outside before sealing the door with his magic. Despite his actions, he looks visibly tense as he asks, "What happened to Sylvie? Is she okay?" Agrona responds calmly, "Oh Sylvie, that's a nice name. Don't worry, I'm only using a harmless spell to communicate with you. Nothing will happen to her. She's just sleeping." Hearing this, Arthur uses his magic again to arrange chairs so they can sit and talk. Agrona notices this and says, "Well, it's nice to communicate with you, especially since you're not trying to kill me." Arthur replies coldly, "I'll kill you the moment you enter my bond. Have you gone mad?" Agrona answers, "By the way, I can't use mana arts inside this body." Then, with a more serious expression, he continues, "Let's talk about something more important." He waves his hand and adds, "I'm glad I came directly to you instead of one of your leaders. It would have been interesting to see their reaction if they knew Agrona had appeared in what they consider the safest place." Arthur narrows his eyes and asks, "What's the second reason?" Suddenly, Agrona steps closer and says, "If there's anyone on this continent I'm most interested in, it's you." Hearing this, Arthur grows even more serious, thinking to himself, "Why would the ruler of Alacria be interested in me? Whatever it is, it can't be good." Agrona smirks and says, "Look at your face. There's no need to worry. I'm not going to attack you." He lets out a small laugh. "This is just a test, and in this form, I can't really do anything anyway." Arthur responds cautiously, "You're a very strange person." Agrona laughs. "Strange? What were you expecting? A cave king trying to conquer the world?" Arthur replies, "Something like that." Agrona continues, "Well, you're not entirely wrong. But I still want to be seen well by my people. I've spent generations in Alacria, watching their morals change. Public executions used to be normal, but now people find them horrifying. It's fascinating how perspectives shift over time. That's why my people now treat the lessers like you." Hearing this, Arthur responds angrily, "So what do you consider right and wrong? You killed millions and destroyed countless lives. That doesn't sound very noble coming from you." Agrona chuckles. "And you say that while displaying my dear Jarrett's frozen body like a trophy? I don't think you're in a position to judge." Arthur pauses, briefly wondering if there's any truth in Agrona's words. Then he says, "Even so, Alacria isn't completely a wasteland. The lessers there are treated like slaves." Agrona replies, "Do you really think I don't care about the lessers?" Arthur responds, "According to the Azuras, you conduct cruel experiments on them. You breed with them and perform countless tests. That's why you were expelled." Agrona smiles slightly. "Do you know what the best kind of lie is? A half-truth." He glances to the side, as if noticing something, and continues, "Did they really never tell you why I was expelled?" Arthur asks, "Isn't it because you wanted to build an army capable of killing the other Azuras?" Agrona pulls out a horn from beneath his cloak and replies, "So that's all they told you?" He tosses it casually and adds, "Do you really think I just woke up one day and decided to slaughter my own kind?" Arthur answers firmly, "No matter what reason you give, it doesn't matter. What you're doing can never be justified." Agrona sighs, slightly disappointed. "I expected as much. Your mindset is just like his." He continues, "Let me give you a theory. Imagine you were born on this continent without magic. How different would your life be? The royal families you know wouldn't even look your way. Your peers from Xyrus? No, without magic, you would never have gone there." He pauses before continuing, "How would you feel? Basilisks are already looked down upon by other races. But imagine your own kind despising you for your lack of talent. Even Lord Indrath, who acknowledged you, wouldn't have spared me a glance." Arthur scoffs and replies, "And this hypothetical version of me is supposed to relate to you? That still doesn't justify playing with countless lives just to gain power." Agrona narrows his eyes and asks, "Do you cry for the ants you step on?" Arthur laughs slightly. "I was naive to think we could have a rational conversation." Agrona waves his hand dismissively and says, Everything I achieved through those experiments has benefited the leaders of Alacria. They worship me, not out of fear, but out of reverence. To them, I am their savior. Arthur asks, did you erase their memories? The memories of you killing and torturing their ancestors? Or something like that? Agrona Vritra turns to the side and replies calmly, I'm sure those test subjects were grateful that I made use of them. It is their heirs, their future generations, who will reap the rewards of their sacrifices. Hearing this, Arthur Lewin thinks to himself, this egotistical maniac. He truly believes what he's doing is right. Arthur then asks, what exactly have you accomplished that could possibly justify experimenting on the people of Alacria? Agrona, while casually touching a nearby piece of art, replies Arthur. In Decathlon, the ratio of mages to non-mages is 1 to 100. He then turns toward Arthur and continues, what do you suppose the ratio is in Alacria? He pauses before answering, it's 1 in 5. Hearing this, Arthur is stunned, his eyes widening in shock. 1 in 5. Agrona smirks and says, look at you, you're impressed. Arthur quickly regains his composure and asks, what's your goal in all of this? You sound insane. Agrona replies calmly, insanity is relative. Arthur, now more cautious, says, I assumed you wanted my help. Or that you were trying to get me on your side. Hearing this, Agrona laughs. My side? He sighs lightly and continues, you make a lot of assumptions, but you're still missing the answers. Then, with a faint smirk, he adds, I suppose I can provide some. The scene shifts to a forest. Soldiers are running quickly, holding their weapons, and forming shields behind them. A huge giant crashes through their defenses, breaking the shields and throwing soldiers aside as it runs away. Even so, the others keep trying to hold their ground, pointing their weapons at the giant beast. One of the leaders shouts angrily, oh great Vritra! Shields up! Keep the defense panels steady. Don't let any beast stray from the pack. The soldiers move forward, trying to control the beasts with their weapons and shields. Nearby, a soldier named Ashton sits on the ground, using his magic. The leader clenches his fists and grits his teeth, thinking angrily. It was such a pain bringing them here from the northern beast glades. I guess even Anads have their uses. Better one of them dies than a mage. He looks at Ashton and asks, can you scan inside the forest? Ashton replies nervously, no sir. My range can't reach that far. Maybe because of the fog. The leader turns and says, looks like you'll have to go in with us. Ashton is shocked. What? That's not what I... Before he can finish, the leader grabs his shoulder and shouts, you sentries think you're special because of your spying tricks? You'll be safe with me and the casters. Safer than if you keep talking. Ashton quickly nods. Yes, sir. The leader lets go and says, now form a mental link with me, and only me. You don't seem very good at multitasking. Ashton places 2 fingers on the leader's head and forms the link. Then he speaks through it, can you hear me? The leader responds, how is it you still stutter even in your own? Ashton interrupts, I can only send messages one way. I won't be able to hear you. The leader tosses him a small bag. I hear you. Get ready. This powder will stop the corrupted beast from attacking you for a short time. He then thinks to himself, all the beasts have entered El's higher forest. I can finally show off my newly unlocked crest. If this mission succeeds, I'll gain access to the obsidian vault and get an emblem, just like my father. Meanwhile, all the soldiers line up, waiting for orders. The leader smiles, raises his hand, and shouts, Anads, front line. Weapons ready. Strikers, behind them with shields. Casters, stay close. All the soldiers get into position, gripping their weapons tightly. The leader cracks his knuckles and gives the final command. In the El's higher forest, the elf soldiers stand guard, holding their weapons and watching the area carefully. Suddenly, loud noises echo through the forest. The soldiers turn in shock and see a large group of mutated monsters rushing toward them. The elves quickly raise their weapons to fight back, but the sudden attack throws them into panic. At the same time, on the other side, the Unad's leader smirks and gives the order, charge. His soldiers rush forward with their weapons, clashing with the elf soldiers. Blades collide as both sides fight fiercely. While watching the battle, the Unad's leader thinks, these Dicathian mages have strange and flexible magic. Even the weaker ones can protect themselves with mana. But it doesn't matter. This mission is an easy way to earn honor and raise my status. He continues thinking proudly, leading these mutant beasts is exciting, much better than those boring secret missions. My presence alone gives these soldiers confidence. Most of them are older than me, yet their runes are far weaker than mine. My father may not have gained a legendary regalia, but I will, once I enter the vault myself. On his back, a glowing mark shows his strong mana power. He smirks confidently and thinks, I alone will make House Vale rise above all of Vekor, maybe even all of Alacria. Then he notices some of the mutant beasts being killed quickly. On the battlefield, the elf leader fights skillfully, cutting down the beasts one by one. She shouts, do not let a single beast pass. The Unad's leader grips his blade and smirks. She's my target. He gives quick orders. Saren, focus your shields on me. Stay back with Mari. Ashton, stay close to them and report my position if I'm in danger. He channels mana into his blade, making it glow, and rushes toward the elf leader with a confident smile. She notices him and blocks his attack, but the force pushes her back. He thinks she barely defended herself with mana. As he turns, several arrows fly toward him. These Dicathian mages may be versatile, but they're as slow as I heard. A shield activates just in time and blocks the arrows. The young leader smirks. Primitive fools. Meanwhile, the mutant beasts continue attacking the elf soldiers, killing them one by one as the battle rages on. The young leader smirks again. He covers his body with fire mana and rushes toward the elf leader with his blade. Ashton, who is linked to his mind, speaks. The Dicathian mage has different mana readings, but she's on the lower side of a mid-tier mage. Her caster is preparing a single target spell. At that moment, the elf leader casts a spell and fires an arrow at him. Duck, Ashton warns. The young leader quickly bends down and dodges the attack. He thinks, if that attack had hit me directly, even a shield wouldn't have saved me. He stands up again, holding his blade covered in fire mana. I need to end this quickly. I can't waste time on one enemy. Ashton continues guiding him. To your right. The young leader moves just in time and dodges another attack. He thinks, so this is what it's like to have a sentry helping. Even without strong attack or defense magic, they're still very useful. He raises his blade and swings it down at the elf leader, trying to crush her. But she dodges at the last moment. His blade slams into the ground, breaking it apart and sending dust into the air. The elf leader covers her eyes. Taking the chance, the young leader rushes forward. His fist, powered with fire mana, strikes her in the stomach. The impact sends her flying back into the trees. She falls to the ground, holding her stomach in pain. The young leader steps forward, holding his blade again. He stands in front of her, raises his sword, and smirks. This was an easy win, he thinks. Suddenly, Ashton's fearful voice echoed, freeze. Stefan, the young leader, felt a terrifying aura. His eyes widened in shock. Ashton, trembling with fear but still linked to him, said, Stefan, you need to get out of there. Now, Stefan's body began to shake. His knees felt weak as panic filled him. What is this? He thought. It feels like something is invading my soul. No. I am the son of Cardinal Vale, heir to the House of Vale. I will not be brought down. Then, just a few steps in front of him, someone appeared. It was Arthur Lewin, standing calmly with narrowed, serious eyes. Stefan stared at him in disbelief. This mage. He looks around my age. How is he this powerful? Arthur raised his hand, covering it with ice magic. Stefan tried to run, but Arthur instantly froze his movement. Stefan collapsed onto the ground. Shaking with fear, he spoke weakly. Ashton, tell Saren to. Before he could finish, he saw his own subordinates running away, leaving him behind. Breathing heavily, he fell completely to the ground, all hope gone. He turned his head toward Arthur. It wasn't supposed to be like this. On the other side, many elf soldiers had already lost their lives. Others struggled to carry the wounded to safety. Arthur looked around and thought, too many elven soldiers have died trying to protect their home. The elf leader stepped forward and said, Thank you, General Arthur, for your help. My name is Lena Imris, head of the Southeastern Unit in Elenwar. Arthur lowered his head slightly and replied, I'm sorry. All of this could have been avoided if I had arrived before the beasts reached the forest. He then remembered his conversation with Agrona Vritra and thought, is this what he meant when he said the war is moving to the next stage? How will the council deal with this? Arthur then looked at Stefan, who lay unconscious on the ground. He raised his hand and called out, "You there?" An elf soldier stepped forward respectfully. "Yes, General Arthur?" Arthur said, "Take him to the camp and treat his wounds so he doesn't bleed out." As the soldier lifted Stefan, Arthur added, "Oh, and make sure he doesn't kill himself. I need him alive."
The scene shifts to the campus. In one part of the campus, Stefan Vale is tied up with ropes. A magic spell has been cast around the area so no one can hear his voice. Soon, Arthur Lewin arrives. Inside, Stefan struggles and shouts angrily, "My arm! Where is my arm? Someone answer me right now!" Arthur enters and silently observes him for a moment. Stefan continues shouting, "If you primitive beasts know what's good for you, you'll untie me. I am of the Vale bloodline, a distinguished family." Before he can finish, Arthur slaps him to shut him up. Stefan lets out a small laugh, shocked. "You slapped me? What's your name?" "I'll." Before he can finish, Arthur grabs him by the neck and lifts him slightly. "I don't think you understand the gravity of the situation you're in," Arthur says coldly. With his other hand, he creates a lightning spell. Stefan's voice trembles. "Unhand me! What are you doing?" As Arthur looks at him, he remembers a conversation with Agrona. "I think it's hardly fair to act like your side is better than mine. Do you shed tears for the ants you step on?" Unable to hold back, Arthur strikes Stefan's face with the lightning. Stefan screams in pain. Arthur strikes him again. Stefan's body trembles violently. "It feels like I'm on fire." Arthur grabs his head and says calmly, "Your nerve endings are a little fried and confused right now. But that's just the beginning." He presses the lightning-covered hand against Stefan's head. Stefan's eyes widen in shock as he screams. But suddenly, Arthur stops. For a moment, he stares at him, almost unable to believe what he's doing. Stefan, still in pain, weakly begs, "Please. Why are you doing this? What do you want?" "I'll give you anything." Arthur replies coldly, "Your name?" "Why do you need to?" Arthur forms lightning again. Terrified, Stefan quickly answers, "Stefan Vale." Arthur nods slightly. "Stefan, your family, your bloodline, is prominent. Am I correct?" "Yes." "I won't kill you if you cooperate. Your condition depends on how honestly you answer my questions. Do you understand?" Arthur releases a small burst of mana to intimidate him. "I understand," Stefan says in fear. Arthur crosses his arms. "Good. List all the members of the Vale house and your relationship to them." Stefan replies, "Lucia Vale, my sister. Izora Vale, my mother. Colonel Vale, my father." Hearing the name Colonel Vale, Arthur recalls it from Yuto's memories. Arthur continues, "What is the awakening process?" "It's a ceremony that unlocks a child's first mark, allowing them to become a mage." Arthur places his hand on his chin. "What's the difference between a mark and a crest?" Stefan hesitates, wondering how Arthur already knows this. "A crest is stronger. It grants a deeper understanding of a specific type of magic." Arthur thinks carefully. "Is a crest the highest level?" "No. After crests come emblems, and then regalias." Arthur's eyes grow colder. "How strong are regalia users compared to retainers?" I don't know. The strongest mage in my family is only an emblem holder." "I swear on the name of Vritra." Arthur sighs. "They treat the Vritra like gods." He asks again, "Do you know how many emblem and regalia holders are currently in Daikathan?" "My commander is an emblem holder, but he answers to a regalia holder." "I don't know the exact numbers." Arthur realizes Stefan is too low-ranking to be very useful. But Stefan quickly adds, "I do know something else. This wasn't the only attack on the forest. Several other troops are heading north right now." Arthur turns and begins to walk away. Stefan pleads desperately, "That's valuable information, right? Please let me go. You promised." "I answered all your questions truthfully." Arthur walks outside, seeing wounded soldiers and dead bodies. Without looking back, he says coldly, "I told you. I wouldn't kill you." Then, with a slight smirk, he adds, "Elven soldiers. Do whatever you want with him." The scene shifts to the forest. Arthur walks alone. He recalls Agrona saying, "I advise you to make a choice soon. We are moving to the next stage of this war, and it won't benefit your side." The thought troubles Arthur. He sits down beside a tree. Should I have told the council about Agrona? He wonders. No one knows about this threat. Except me and Sylvie. He takes out a water bag from his storage and drinks. She only knows because it's getting harder to hide my thoughts from her, he thinks. I hope Sylvie is adjusting to her new body and abilities. He clenches his fist. I have better control over my dragon's will now that I've reached the white core stage. He places his hand on his head, worried. It's a good thing I left her at the castle. Again, Agrona's words echo in his mind. I'm sure those test subjects were grateful. Winsam, Alder, and the rest of the Azuras have abandoned you and Daikathan. Suddenly, his memories shift. He sees his past life as Gray. Gray is tied tightly to a chair. A voice calls out, "Can you hear me?" Gray struggles to free himself, slowly opening his eyes. "Who are you?" A figure in the shadows spoke. "What is the last thing you remember?" Gray thought for a moment and replied, "I just won the tournament." The figure asked again, "What else?" Gray answered, "I accepted an offer to be mentored by a powerful person." The figure stepped forward, revealing a man with a mark on his face standing in front of Gray. Another man beside him asked, "What is the name of the woman? And what is the nature of your relationship?" Gray thought carefully. If they already know it was a woman, they're only looking for confirmation. He replied, "I know her as Lady Vera. I just met her." The man with the mark pointed at Gray and shouted, "Lies." The other man held him back and calmly asked, "What happened after you won the tournament, Gray?" Gray answered nervously, "I was heading back to my dorm room." Suddenly, the marked man grabbed Gray by the neck and shouted again, "Lies." He lifted Gray along with the chair and said coldly, "It would be wise to tell us which organization sent you to protect the legacy." Gray trembled, unable to scream. Tears filled his eyes as he thought, "What are they talking about? Organization? Legacy?" The man threw him down, and Gray cried out in pain. The other man turned to his partner and said, "Strip him. I'll get the white phosphorus." After removing Gray's clothes, the man held 2 small containers and said, "I believe you have information we need. Fortunately for you, we need you alive. For now." Gray thought weakly, "How long was I unconscious?" The man opened a bottle and said, "If you are who we think you are, you may have prepared for this. But if we are wrong, then this will be very uncomfortable." He dipped his gloved fingers into the substance and added, "This will hurt." Gray panicked. "What are you talking about?" The man pressed it onto Gray's chest. Gray's voice shook. "Wait. What are you doing? Please." Moments later, the man ignited it. Gray screamed in pain, his body shaking uncontrollably. Again, the man repeated it. "Don't do this," Gray begged. But the burning continued, and Gray screamed even louder. It became hard to track time, Gray thought. They would hurt me, then stop, giving me false hope. Only to start again. Before they could continue, Gray cried out, "I'll tell you anything. Everything. Just stop." The man nodded. "That's better." He held the containers in his hands and said, "Now, I'll tell you a story. And you'll fill in the gaps if you want to avoid more pain." He continued, "Your name is Gray. Headmaster Olivia Wilbeck took care of you since infancy. The orphanage was your home. Correct?" Gray nodded weakly. The man leaned closer. "Which military institution trained you to become the legacy's protector?" Gray replied, "I've only completed my 2nd year at Cyrus Academy. I've had no prior training." The man clenched his teeth in anger. "So you're saying you defeated skilled fighters without training?" "I had help from my friends. But why would Wilbeck," the man interrupted angrily, "allow the legacy to walk around publicly with ordinary children?" Gray looked at him in confusion. "What is this legacy you keep talking about? I've never heard of it." The man's eyes widened. He stepped closer and said coldly, "There are only 2 things I want to know, Gray. Which organization sent you? And how much is the country of Trident involved in publicly announcing Lady Vera as your mentor?" He pressed the substance against Gray's cheek. Gray, terrified, whispered, "Please." The man lit a flame and brought it closer. "I don't know," Gray cried, sweat running down his face. Just as the flame was about to touch him, a sword suddenly appeared and struck the man holding the flame in the neck. Before anyone could react, another strike hit the marked man, sending him flying backward. A calm voice said, "You're safe now, kid." Gray's eyes filled with tears as he struggled to stay conscious. Standing before him was Vera, his mentor. She had come to save him. After taking a rest, Arthur took to the air using his magic. As he flew, he thought, the sensation of flying is exhilarating. He turned to look back at the forest and considered, Lena and her elven forces will be better off with General Aya, given her experience with the terrain. A small smile formed on his face as he surged forward at full speed. I should head back to the castle. But the transmission scrolls should provide enough information about the Alacrians for now. The view felt different flying without Sylvie. Memories of his past life surfaced, and he thought, she'll probably worry that I had another dream about my former life. I'll update her when I get back. Closing his eyes briefly, Arthur increased his speed. As he looked down, he thought, for now, I need to go where I'm needed the most. Suddenly, he stepped on the air to slow himself, raising a hand as he reduced his momentum. Looking down beyond the mountains, he spotted a massive wall. Fires burned fiercely, and the sounds of battle echoed across the land. An Alacrian rode a beast, charging forward, while 2 soldiers thrust their spears at it. Blood splattered as the beast let out a pained scream, its rider nearly falling off. Another Alacrian raised a shield spell, deflecting attacks and forcing the soldiers back. Observing the scene, Arthur thought, this is where I'm needed. The wall faces constant assaults as the Alacrians attempt to break through the defensive line. I've read many reports about these attacks, but this is the first time I'm witnessing it myself. At that moment, someone atop the massive wall aimed a fire spell at him. Arthur instantly noticed the attack, turned, and raised his hand, effortlessly blocking it before redirecting the flames downward. The soldier who had cast the spell stood frozen in shock, unable to comprehend how Arthur had stopped it so easily. In the next instant, Arthur rushed toward them. Panic spread among the soldiers as he descended, landing firmly on the rooftop of the massive wall. The force of his arrival sent a powerful gust of wind swirling around them. "General!" someone shouted. The captain of the soldiers stepped forward, standing in front of Arthur Lewin, while the others saluted behind him. One soldier, trembling, stood beside the captain, the very one who had launched the fire spell. "My sincerest apologies for my subordinate's grave mistake," the captain said, bowing deeply. He forcefully pushed the soldier's head down as well. With anger in his voice, he added, "We had not received any notice that a lance would be visiting the wall. He mistook you for an enemy. I will reprimand this fool and see to his punishment immediately." Arthur Lewin smiled faintly, thinking, "It's been a while since I've been treated like this." Still smiling, he replied, "There's no need. I arrived unannounced from the Beast Glades, so the confusion is understandable." He then turned his gaze to the nervous soldier and said, "Good eye, soldier. But next time you encounter an unidentified threat, report it to your superiors immediately. Understood?" The soldier straightened, still visibly nervous, and saluted. "Understood, General." Arthur Lewin stepped forward and asked the captain for his name and position. The captain walked alongside him and replied, "Captain Albinth Kelris of the Bulwark Division." Arthur turned to him with a slight smile. "Well then, Captain Albinth Kelris. Let's talk strategy." As they descended the stairs, Captain Kelris began to explain, "My division primarily consists of workers responsible for maintenance and construction of the wall. The constant stray attacks keep them busy. I submit daily reports on repairs, resources, and supplies." Arthur observed the soldiers as they worked tirelessly to reinforce and protect the wall. Nodding, he said, "Quite impressive. Calling this place the wall is quite misleading. When it's so much more," he thought. As they descended deeper along the wooden stairs, a loud noise echoed throughout the structure. "Please excuse the noise, General," Captain Albinth Kelris said. "I've been told it can be quite overwhelming for those who aren't used to it." "Overwhelming indeed," Arthur Lewin replied. "But I regret taking so long to visit. The floors from here on are accessible to civilians as well," the captain explained. As they reached the next level, several soldiers noticed their captain. Two of them quickly stepped forward and saluted him. The captain immediately frowned and snapped, "Why are you saluting me in the presence of a lance?" The soldiers' eyes shifted toward Arthur, widening in surprise. Realizing their mistake, they quickly saluted again. "General!" Arthur let out a small laugh. "One salute is enough." "Yes, sir," the soldiers replied nervously. They continued walking, the heat increasing as sweat formed on Arthur's face. He wiped it away and asked, "Is there a fire nearby?" "We're passing through the main forge," Captain Kelris answered. "There's always a lot of heat and smoke here." The floor was filled with activity. Workers labored intensely, using magic to operate massive machines that released bursts of steam into the air. Arthur looked around in surprise, thinking, the mechanisms behind this wall are incredible. He paused in front of a huge piece of machinery, studying it closely. This looked similar to an old steam-driven hammer from Earth. But how? Then he noticed the use of gravity magic. One worker held a glowing piece of iron while another manipulated it with gravity, shaping it with precision. Nearby, two more workers used fire magic to heat and mold the metal. As they continued descending, Arthur kept glancing around, carefully observing every detail of the process. Eventually, they reached the civilian district. Captain Kelris turned to him and said, "The wall is quite the marvel, isn't it?" "It's amazing," Arthur replied, looking around. "The infrastructure and population have grown so much in just a few years. There's practically an entire economy here." "Exactly," the captain said as they walked on. "Since there's no law mandating service in the war, we offer rewards to adventurers who volunteer. They earn easy money, and we gain able-bodied mages and fighters. There is occasional tension between the soldiers and the adventurers." Arthur watched as children ran past, laughing and playing. A faint smile crossed his face. "But everyone here shares a common enemy beyond these walls," Captain Kelris finished. As they continued walking, Arthur Lewin's eyes drifted toward a group of adventurers. One of them, holding a sword, spoke to a nearby merchant. "Would this really stand a chance against a mutant?" the adventurer asked skeptically. The merchant let out a laugh. "Would any of us?" he replied before adding, "I'm just kidding, Of course it can. I'll pass, but thanks, the adventurer said, shaking his head. On the other side, another merchant approached Arthur, offering him a pair of boots at a discounted price. Arthur simply waved his hand, indicating he didn't need them. He then glanced back at Captain Albert Kelris and asked, "Are the merchants here because of the adventurers?" "Yes, sir," the captain replied. "They're restricted from operating on the main supply route, so they set up shop here instead." As they moved down to a lower floor, Captain Kelris continued, "Even though the taxes here are quite high, they still come in droves. Without them, we'd have to worry about supplying food, clothing, weapons, and even entertainment for thousands of mercenaries." Arthur listened as they walked. "We pay the adventurers," the captain went on. "The adventurers spend their earnings with the merchants, and we collect taxes from the merchants to fund the adventurers. It keeps everything balanced." As they passed by food stalls, the smell caught Arthur's attention, and his stomach growled softly. He felt slightly embarrassed but kept walking. "Everyone earns a living," Captain Kelris continued, "and we all play a role in defending the wall." Arthur looked around with a faint smile. "It's brilliant," he thought. "A resourceful use of everything available." His gaze shifted to the captain. "The economy here says a lot about the senior captain managing this city-like fortress." Captain Kelris smiled slightly. "I'm sure flying down would have been much faster, but I hope this tour helped you become more familiar with the wall." "I appreciate it, Captain Albert," Arthur replied. The captain nodded. "This is where the captains and division heads hold their meetings." Arthur looked ahead, surprised. "That's a lot of guards," he thought. "You arrived at a good time," Captain Kelris added, slipping a hand into his pocket. "A meeting is about to begin. I was heading there when you showed up." He presented his identification to the guards, who quickly granted them entry. "The senior captain is inside," Kelris said as they walked in, along with the other captains and division heads. The senior captain, Arthur thought. Inside, a large table dominated the room, covered with a massive map. Several captains sat around it, holding documents as they discussed matters. Their attention shifted as Arthur entered. Captain Kelris saluted. The senior captain rose from his seat and spoke, General Arthur Lewin. It's an honor to have a lance present here." The others immediately began to stand out of respect, but Arthur raised his hand. "No need. Please stay seated." The senior captain nodded and continued, "Please, have a seat and allow me to introduce myself. I am Trodia Flamesworth, the senior captain in charge of the wall." The scene shifts to the castle, where a voice echoes loudly, "Come on. You've got this." Inside, Sylvie, now in her human form, looks completely exhausted. She leans against the side table, her body trembling. Struggling to keep herself upright, she mutters, I can't." Her voice shakes as she repeats, "I can't do it." On the other side, Arthur Lewin's younger sister, Eleanor Lewin, raises both her hands, encouraging her. "You can do it," she says with determination. Eleanor is trying to teach Sylvie how to walk. Since Sylvie is in human form, she isn't used to standing or moving on her own feet yet. Sylvie looks at Eleanor and lifts her hands slightly, pleading, "You're too far this time. Come a few steps closer." But Eleanor shakes her head firmly. "No. You have to try walking further without any help." Taking a deep breath, Sylvie turns around and slowly attempts to stand properly. Her legs tremble as she carefully taps her foot forward, trying to move. As she manages to take a step, Eleanor beams with excitement. "That's it. You're doing really." Before she can finish, Sylvie loses her balance and begins to fall. Seeing this, Eleanor quickly jumps forward with her hands outstretched, trying to catch her. But instead, both of them tumble to the ground together. They stare at each other for a moment, panic in their eyes, before suddenly bursting into laughter. Still lying on the ground, they hold each other's hands, laughing freely at the moment. Back at the wall, a meeting was being held, and Arthur joined in. One of the captains, Captain Kruer, pointed at the map spread across the large table and said, "Based on their last transmission, there are currently 5 units in this region, and another 3 farther east." The senior captain in charge, Trodia Flamesworth, held a set of documents in his hand as he responded, "Captain Kruer, the log sheets for clearing the dungeons. How accurate is this timeline?" Captain Kruer replied, "Fairly accurate, taking everything into account." Before she could finish, Trodia placed the documents firmly on the table. "1 week is too long," he said coldly. "The number of corrupted beasts attacking the wall continues to grow. 4 days for each dungeon, that's all we can allow." Arthur watched him carefully. Throughout the entire meeting, he paid close attention to Trodia Flamesworth. He couldn't help but feel a negative bias toward him after hearing about the Flamesworth family's values from Jasmine and Hester. On the other side, Captain Kruer quickly placed several papers onto the table and protested, "But sir, rushing the expeditions to that degree will cause significantly more casualties." Arthur continued his thoughts as the discussion went on. After hearing everything in the meeting and seeing the man in person, all he felt was a wary sense of callousness. Some of these dungeons had never been cleared before. Without extreme caution, an entire unit could be wiped out. But in the end, he had come here as a lance, not as Jasmine's friend. Trodia Flamesworth waved his hand and replied firmly, "The wall is the last line of defense on the eastern border, and our numbers are already limited. If a soldier from your unit dies out in the Beast Glades, that soldier's family isn't in danger." Hearing this, Captain Kruer felt a wave of nervousness but remained silent. Arthur Lewin continued observing, his thoughts running quietly. Trodia Flamesworth may be a poor father with a cold personality. Trodia continued speaking, his tone unwavering. However, if the number of beasts from uncleared dungeons overwhelms the wall because your unit is too busy exercising extreme caution in one dungeon, many more lives will be lost here. And those monsters, and the Alacrians controlling them, will move on unimpeded to the nearby towns. Captain Kruer nodded, understanding the situation. Trodia looked at her coldly. 4 days. That is an order, Captain Kruer. Arthur glanced at him again, thinking, but his leadership is solid. Then Trodia turned to another officer. Captain Albert Kelris, what is the progress on the new routes for our Trailblazer division? Arthur's eyes shifted slightly. That's Tesh's division, he thought. Captain Albert Kelris raised his hand and replied, "We've just finished securing the 4th tunnel." He stood up and pointed at the map. It's the longest one yet, and the entrance is hidden in a small crevice along a riverbank. A team of Earth mages is still reinforcing the tunnel, but it should be accessible to Captain Kruer's unit within the week. Trodia responded without hesitation, "Pull back a fourth of the workers and have them work at night instead. We were forced to flood another route just last week because its location had been compromised. Securing more underground routes is a priority." He then turned back to Captain Kruer. "Are there any updates on locating new teleportation gates?" Captain Kruer replied, "We've only allocated a single unit to scouting for gates. I'll need more time." Arthur spoke up, slightly puzzled. "Teleportation gates?" Trodia gestured lightly and explained, "Yes. The attacks on the wall are constant, and we send new troops every day. Right now, the best way for our soldiers to access the Beast Glades is through our underground channels. But those tunnels are often unstable, and traveling on foot is slow and dangerous." He continued, "However, with the train currently being built to connect the wall to Black End City, we will soon have easier access to the city's teleportation gate. If we are able to locate any gates hidden within the Beast Glades, we can connect them to the city gate. That way, we can move troops without hours of marching through unstable tunnels." Arthur asked, "How are you certain that there are any teleportation gates in the Beast Glades?" Trodia replied calmly, "We're not. Which is why we're only expending a limited amount of resources on the search." Arthur Lewin looked at the documents and thought, teleportation gates, along with the floating castle and Zyrus City, are relics left behind by the mages of old. These archaic stone arches are engraved with indecipherable runes. Yet entire cities have been built around them. Modern artificers have learned how to connect teleportation gates and change their destinations. But actually creating one remains a distant dream. After a moment, Arthur spoke. "What method is the unit using to track down the gates? I assume they're not just blindly wandering around." Trodia held the documents in his hand, resting his other hand against his chin as he considered the question. "I prefer not to waste even the smallest amount of resources," he said. He then placed the documents on the table and tapped them lightly. The gates constantly emit faint fluctuations of mana particles. Since these fluctuations occur across the entire spectrum of elements, the gates blend into the environment, making them difficult to detect. Arthur frowned slightly as he processed this. Then it would be similar to tracking mana fluctuations, like when I had to find Darv. Searching for deviations in ambient mana using Realm Heart was already difficult. But detecting fluctuations across all elements, while flying blindly over the entire Beast Glades. He took a deep breath. It would be a waste of time, especially since there might not even be any gates. "I understand," Arthur said calmly. Trodia nodded. "My apologies for having you sit through this meeting, Lance Arthur. We'll wrap it up shortly." Arthur shook his head slightly. "Actually, before you end the meeting, I would like to share what I've learned about the enemy forces." The scene shifts to the civilian area. People chatter among themselves, trying to appear cheerful, but beneath their smiles, they hide their fear. Arthur observes them quietly. According to the reports, many families reside within the wall's small makeshift city, mostly the families of soldiers, merchants, and others like them. Living here, right on the doorstep of battle, drives people to seek whatever comforts they can afford. Suddenly, the sound of an explosion echoes through the air. The wall is under attack again. Arthur's attention immediately snaps toward the sound. Around him, the civilians also look up, their expressions tense as the distant rumble reaches them. Nearby, a merchant waves his hand, trying to keep business going despite the situation. Your shoes look a bit thin for someone in these parts. Might I interest you in a pair of fine leather boots for your poor feet? Arthur glances around. If you look closely, you can see it, the subtle tension hidden beneath the surface. It's in the laborer's quick steps and downcast eyes. In the short, nervous exchanges between merchants and adventurers. Everyone is pretending not to be afraid. He picks up a pair of leather boots, still deep in thought. These people understand the threat of the Alacrians better than anyone. His mind drifts back to the earlier meeting. Trodia had smiled faintly and said, "Intriguing. General, you say that the Alacrian mages have a very limited and specialized form of magic manifestation. But what is stopping a striker from forming their mana into a protective shield?" Captain Kruer had added, as Senior Captain Flamesworth said, "I can't pass this information to my troops without certainty. They could be injured or killed if a striker suddenly launches a ranged spell or conjures a mana blade as a shield." Arthur had replied calmly, "You don't need complete certainty. Inform only the unit leaders and have them observe." Then, looking directly at Trodia, he had continued, "Our enemies use magic very differently from us. But different doesn't mean better. Study their abilities and exploit their flaws. The Council will be expecting reports based on observations of the enemy's limitations." Back in the present, Arthur sits while eating some barbecue, lost in thought. Even after learning about marks, crests, emblems, and regalias, I can tell they're still hesitant to believe the Alacrians are truly that different. Hopefully, this information will still give us an edge in the battles ahead. Suddenly, the sound of steady footsteps approaches. A troop of soldiers marches past, holding their spears as they head out. The merchant glances at them and says, "There goes the Southern Evening Patrol." An adventurer sitting nearby scoffs. "A waste of resources, if you asked me. They should send all the soldiers toward the glades." The merchant replies, "They probably want to ensure safety after what happened last week." The adventurer waves his hand dismissively. Losing a few supply carts won't matter if the Alacrians manage to break through the front lines. Arthur listens to their conversation, then looks ahead as he begins to walk forward. Focusing all your forces in one place is a sure way to lose a war. He exhales quietly. Well, time to get back to work. With renewed determination, Arthur steps forward. The scene shifts to the outside of the wall. From far away, the sound of movement echoes through the air as a winding road cuts across the mountains, leading toward the massive structure. Along that road, 4 carriages move steadily forward, carrying vital supplies. Everyone remains alert, focused on ensuring the cargo reaches its destination safely. One of the carriages is driven by Arthur Lewin's father, Reynolds Lewin. Narrowing his eyes at the distant structure, he says, "The wall is in sight." A cold wind sweeps across the path as the twin horns accompany them, guarding the supplies with vigilance. Inside another carriage, Arthur Lewin's mother, Alice Lewin, sits alongside Jasmine, one of the twin horns. Both remain tense but determined, committed to their duty of safely delivering the supplies to the wall. Suddenly, one of the creatures pulling a carriage lets out a loud, panic scream. Hearing it, Reynolds' gaze snaps toward the source. His expression shifts to shock as he quickly grabs the reins, trying to steady the frightened beast. "Stay alert! Something," he shouts, but before he can finish, a burst of fire erupts behind them. Reynolds grits his teeth, his mind racing. Another ambush? One of the carriages is set ablaze, and the creatures pulling it shriek in agony, terrified by the flames. At the same time, Jasmine and the twin horns take their positions, raising their bows and preparing to counterattack. The fire spreads chaos among the convoy. The panicked creatures struggle wildly against their restraints. Despite Reynolds' efforts to calm them, they refuse to settle. With a violent jerk, one of the creatures breaks free and bolts down the road, dragging the carriage out of formation. Angela Rose dropped to one knee, quickly locating the source of the ambush. Raising his staff, he cast a spell and pointed ahead. "Over there!" A wave of magic shot forward, striking an Alacrian soldier, only for the enemy to raise a barrier and block the attack. At the same time, Alice Lewin and Jasmine leapt out of their carriage. Jasmine gripped her daggers and rushed forward without hesitation. Behind her, Helen Shard drew her bow and began firing arrows in rapid succession. One of the carriages lost its balance amid the chaos, tipping over as 2 men were thrown to the ground. Angela lifted his staff again, conjuring multiple spells into the air. "Give us cover!" he shouted. Nearby, Reynolds Lewin clenched his teeth, scanning the area. "Where are they hiding?" Durden Walker quickly reacted, casting a defensive spell that formed a barrier around the carriages and his teammates. Others scrambled to steady the remaining carriages while searching for the hidden attackers. Stepping into the center of the barrier, Reynolds raised his voice. "Get ready to fight. Don't let them damage the supplies." Helen glanced at Durden, noticing his panic. Durden, stay on defense. Give Angela and me a clear view. Nodding, Durden used his earth magic to raise 2 large stone platforms from the ground, lifting Angela and Helen upward. From their elevated positions, they gained a better view of the battlefield. Meanwhile, Jasmine charged toward an Alacrian hiding in the distance. The enemy hurled flames at her, but she reacted instantly, throwing both of her daggers. The blades cut through the fire and flew straight toward him. He quickly raised a barrier, deflecting the attack, but in that instant, an arrow pierced his neck. The Alacrian staggered in shock. It was Helen, who had taken the shot from above. Suddenly, another Alacrian appeared, riding a massive flying creature as he descended toward Helen, weapon raised to strike. Behind you! Angela shouted, immediately casting another spell. He hurled a large rock with his magic, striking the creature midair. It's coming down! He yelled. The beast let out a cry as blood splattered from the impact, losing control. Its rider jumped free to save himself. As he landed, he unleashed a barrage of small ice shards, but Helen's next arrow cut through the air and narrowly missed him. Reynolds, stop him! Helen shouted. The ice shards flew toward one of the Twin Horns members, but before they could hit, Reynolds leapt forward, summoning flames to intercept and shatter the attack. Without hesitation, he followed up with a powerful punch aimed at the Alacrian. But just before the blow could land, the enemy conjured another wave of ice, swinging it forward. The sharp shards slashed across Reynolds' arm. He gritted his teeth in pain as blood seeped from the wound. Move aside, the Alacrian sneered. Clutching his injured arm, Reynolds stood his ground, unwavering. Never. From above, Helen Shard fired a volley of arrows at the Alacrian. The enemy reacted quickly, raising a barrier that blocked every shot. At the same time, a wave of magic from Angela Rose surged toward him from another direction, but once again, the Alacrian reinforced his barrier and stopped the attack. Then, suddenly, his attention snapped elsewhere. Without warning, the barrier surrounding him shattered, leaving him confused and exposed. Still gripping his ice dagger, he turned toward the disturbance, only to realize too late what was happening. Seizing the opportunity, Reynolds Lewin charged forward, his fist engulfed in flames. In a single decisive strike, his blazing punch slammed into the Alacrian's chest, burning straight through it. The enemy collapsed to the ground, defeated. Reynolds and the members of the Twin Horns remained standing, breathing heavily from the battle. Moments later, a figure appeared in front of them. Reynolds immediately noticed and tensed, before recognizing him. It was Arthur Lewin. Arthur stood calmly, holding a captured Alacrian by the collar. I left this one alive for questioning, he said, tossing the prisoner down beside the supply beasts. We'll send soldiers to collect that creature as well for research. Everyone stared at him in surprise. Arthur looked around, slightly uneasy. What? Reynolds suddenly grabbed Arthur by the shoulder, laughing as he held on tightly. I don't think I'll ever forget that you're a lance now. The others joined in with laughter. Arthur scratched the back of his head, smiling awkwardly. Soon after, the convoy resumed its journey and finally arrived at the wall. The carriages passed through the gates, the supplies safely delivered as soldiers moved in to secure everything. Arthur stood to the side, watching as the supplies were handed over. That was my first time seeing the Twin Horns fight in years, he thought. They know exactly how to play to each other's strengths and cover each other's weaknesses. It's clear they've built that through years of experience and shared battles. His expression softened slightly. But how many more battles can they endure before the war takes its toll on them? A gentle hand tapped his shoulder, pulling him from his thoughts. He turned to see his mother, Alice Lewin, looking at him calmly. As they walked together toward the mess hall, Reynolds spoke up, glancing at Arthur with curiosity. I can't even sense your core anymore, Arthur. How strong have you gotten? Arthur smiled. I reached the white core not too long ago. Reynolds burst into laughter, clearly proud. Did you hear that? He said to the others. Alice gestured for the Twin Horns to sit with him, waving her hand warmly. Reynolds then leaned forward, pressing his forehead lightly against Arthur's, smiling. My boy. Arthur couldn't help but smile back, feeling a quiet sense of happiness. Watching them laugh together, Arthur felt a quiet warmth in his chest. Even though I knew my parents handled deliveries to and from the wall, I never expected to run into them here. It felt almost like luck, being able to share a meal with the Twin Horns again. As they ate, Reynolds looked at Arthur and said, We send your sister messages every time we return to Black End. Arthur paused mid-drink, surprised. Really? Ellie never told me about that. Reynolds chuckled. Your sister's going through a rebellious phase. Alice smiled softly and added, Most of the time, she just replies with I'm okay or I'm alive. Her expression turned slightly worried. Is she eating well? Making friends? Arthur set his cup down. If you're that concerned, why not visit the castle? I'm sure that's what Ellie really wants. Helen, overhearing them, spoke up while taking a sip of her drink. Security around the castle has tightened recently. Only high-ranking officials can use the teleportation gates, and even then, only for official business. Arthur turned to his parents with a small smile. I can take you myself. We can go to Black Bend together, and then head to the castle. Alice gently shook her head. We don't want to trouble you. Besides, a new underground transportation route is being built. She placed her hand over Arthur's. Once it's finished, we'll be able to visit you and Ellie much more often. Arthur quickly covered her hand with his own, his expression tightening with concern. But I've heard reports that the journey from Black Bend is becoming more dangerous. Just look at the battle you fought today. Reynolds frowned slightly. What about that battle? No one was seriously injured. Those Alacrians barely touched me. Arthur met his gaze, his voice firm. This time. But what about the next? Last time, Jasmine and Durden were unconscious. He pressed a hand against his chest. Ellie worries about you. I worry about you. Silence settled heavily over the table. The twin horns shifted uncomfortably, unsure how to respond. Angela suddenly stood up, forcing a nervous smile. Oh, right. We never took our belongings out of the carriage. Helen quickly caught on. Ah, you're right. We'd better grab them before anything gets stolen. They began to leave, gesturing for the others to follow. Durden and Jasmine stood as well, with Durden awkwardly adding, I wonder where our waiter went. Soon they were gone, leaving Arthur alone with his parents. Alice looked at him gently. Arthur, our responsibilities here may not be on the same scale as yours as a lance, but we're still doing our part in this war. We're fighting to end it. Just like you. Arthur shook his head. You're putting yourselves in danger. Everyone is in danger while Dicathan is at war, Alice replied calmly. Even you, Arthur. Yes, but I can handle it. Arthur snapped. Reynolds' expression hardened. Do you realize how hypocritical that sounds? He said sharply. So it's fine for you to risk your life, as long as Ellie, your mother, and I stay locked away somewhere safe? Abandoning our responsibility to our kingdom? Arthur's anger flared. I'm fighting this war to protect you. What if something happens to you or Mom while I'm away on a mission? His voice tightened. Even Ellie. The reason she's training so hard is because she wants to join you. What if she dies too, like Adam? That's enough. Reynolds snapped, clenching his teeth. He took a breath, his voice firm but heavy. Keeping my family safe is my priority. But I also want my family to live happily. That's why we're doing this. He looked directly at Arthur, his eyes filled with conviction. Dicathan may not be your only home. But it's ours. And if that means dying so Ellie can live in a better future, then so be it. Alice lowered her head quietly. Then, without another word, she stood and left with Reynolds. Arthur remained where he was, his hand trembling with anger. In a sudden burst of emotion, he slammed his fist into the table, cracking it. A moment later, he shot to his feet and launched himself into the air, flying off in the direction his parents had gone. The pressure from his sudden surge of power caused nearby objects to shatter as he sped forward. Arthur Lewin sat sadly on top of a mountain cliff, thinking about his recent conversation with his parents. The cliff was so high that even the massive wall in front of him looked small. A cool wind flowed around the area, adding to the quiet mood. As Arthur focused on his thoughts, a hand suddenly grabbed the edge of the cliff below him. Startled, he froze for a moment. Then the figure climbed up. It was Jasmine. You should have some respect for those who can't fly, she said, jumping up and sitting beside him. Looking at him, she added, so this is where you ran off to last night? We've been looking for you all day. When we returned to the inn, the owner was worried about the mess you left. Arthur rubbed his cheek nervously. Sorry about that. I'll send a gift to make up for it. But how did you find me? Jasmine breathed into her hands to warm them. Don't underestimate your mentor. Arthur smiled slightly. I never have. After a short pause, she asked, how long have you been at the wall? I just arrived yesterday, Arthur replied. He then lit a small flame in his hand using fire magic to warm her. Seeing this, Jasmine said softly, thank you. After a moment, she asked, did you get the chance to meet my father? Arthur added more fire to keep the air warm. I walked in during one of his meetings. Have you seen him? Jasmine shook her head. Not once, even after all my trips back and forth. She hesitated before continuing. I won't ask about what happened at the inn, but you should know that your parents really care about you and Ellie. Whenever your father meets someone new, he always talks about his son, the Lance, and how proud he is. Honestly, it's a bit annoying. Arthur chuckled lightly. I know they care. Jasmine looked up at the sky. Reynolds, Lewin, and Alice both feel a lot of guilt. No matter what we say, they blame themselves for not being there when Adam died. Arthur lowered his eyes, silently taking in her words. She continued, "You know what happened to your mother before you were born. After what happened to Lensa, she was deeply traumatized. It took her a long time before she could use magic for anything more than minor injuries." Arthur flicked a small rock off the cliff. "I know. That's why I thought they would stay at the castle until the war ended. But instead they threw themselves into the middle of it, traveling through dangerous lands, fighting off attacks." Before he could finish, Jasmine gently placed her hand over his and smiled. "What they're doing now is for you and Ellie, but also for themselves," she said. "They're trying to overcome their past mistakes and fears so they can become better parents." Arthur sighed softly. "I know. I've been selfish too. I think all of us just need time to adjust." Jasmine looked at him with a hint of sadness. Don't let your relationship with your parents turn out like mine with my family. There was a time when we could have fixed things, but I kept running away. And my father's pride kept him from reaching out." The wind continued to blow as the two sat quietly, lost in their thoughts. Arthur Lewin felt a sense of relief after hearing Jasmine's words. He looked at her and said, "Thanks, Jasmine." Jasmine quickly replied, "You better be thankful. My jaw is sore from all this talking." Despite her complaint, they continued talking, sharing stories. Some were light and funny, while others were heavy and serious. Arthur told her about his time with the Azuras, how he had defeated a Vritter retainer, and about Sylvie's human form. Hearing this, Jasmine was clearly surprised and shocked. In return, she shared stories about the adventures of the twin horns. They spent the entire night catching up. After a while, Jasmine stood up and stretched her arms. With a small smile, Arthur said, "Thank you for everything." Jasmine gently patted his head. Then, using her magic, she leapt off the cliff, leaving Arthur alone. Arthur looked up at the sky and let out a quiet sigh. After their conversation, he felt a little more at ease. The scene shifted to the castle, where many sounds echoed through the halls. Inside the kitchen, the elven chief was busy making a cake. As he carefully prepared one of the desserts, his eyes suddenly shifted. He had noticed something. It was Sylvie, peeking from the side, watching the cake with clear desire. After finally getting some food, Sylvie walked on her feet while eating. She thought to herself, "How does Arthur do this all the time? It's so tiring to use mana just to walk." Behind her, a maid watched her curiously. As Sylvie stepped forward, she heard a voice coming from a nearby room. "I think I'm ready." "No, I am ready." "Ah. Does that sound too desperate?" Hearing this, Sylvie quietly snuck inside. It was Eleanor Lewin, talking to her beast. Sylvie asked politely, "What are you doing?" Startled, Eleanor quickly waved her hands. "Nothing." Sylvie smiled and gently wiped her face with her hand. "We should head down. Arthur Lewin will be arriving soon." A few minutes later, Arthur Lewin arrived at the castle. Heavy rain was falling outside, leaving him completely drenched as he stepped in. He paused at the entrance, trying to shake off the water. The servants bowed their heads, welcoming him back. Sylvie and Eleanor Lewin, along with her beast Boo, were also there to greet him. As Arthur moved forward to hug his sister, Ellie noticed how wet he was and quickly stepped back. "Since you're completely soaked, can we skip the hug?" she said. Meanwhile, Sylvie was busy eating her food. Arthur ignored Ellie's protest, laughed, and pulled her into a hug anyway. "No way. I want the real thing. I just bathed," Ellie shouted, trying to push him away. Arthur continued hugging her, as she struggled. Then he looked at Sylvie and said with a smile, "I see my fearsome dragon is growing into a healthy young girl." Sylvie paused and asked through their bond, "Did something happen?" Arthur replied, "We'll talk about it later." He then released Ellie and raised his hand, using wind magic to drive both of them with a gentle gust. As they walked together, Ellie spoke excitedly, "I broke into the light red stage while you were gone. I've been training with Boo every day. Even Commander Virion praised me. He said I'm way ahead of other conjurers my age." Sylvie rode on Boo, quietly listening to their conversation. Ellie continued, "I might even be able to skip the mandatory soldier training." Arthur smiled, but his thoughts drifted. "She's getting bolder about joining the army. What would our parents say? I didn't get to talk to them again before I left. Maybe if they were here, Ellie wouldn't be so eager to fight." Noticing Arthur seemed distracted, Ellie spoke again with a smile. "You know, Princess Kathleen has been really helpful too. She's been sparring with me and helping me improve my mana control." Arthur quickly responded, "You know, I can teach you magic when I'm free. I was a professor at Cyrus Academy, after all." Ellie rubbed her cheek awkwardly. "For like a semester." Then she folded her arms and said calmly, "Thanks for the offer, but I think learning from you would just discourage me." Arthur frowned slightly. "What do you mean?" Ellie looked up at him. "I know we're only 4 years apart, but we still share the same blood. You're already a white core mage and a quadra elemental. If you tried to teach me, I'd just end up comparing myself to you. Arthur looked at her quietly, a bit saddened. Suddenly, Sylvie turned while riding Boo, laughed, and waved her hand. It's okay. Your brother's talent is considered an anomaly even among Azuras. Don't compare yourself to a freak like him. Arthur scratched his head awkwardly. Freak is a bit harsh, isn't it? Ellie laughed. No, I think freak describes you perfectly in this case. They all laughed together. After a while, Ellie and Boo said their goodbyes. Arthur and Sylvie waved back as they left. Nearby, a servant respectfully stepped forward and opened a door, guiding Arthur inside. As Arthur entered the room, his eyes widened in surprise for a moment. The old man sitting in the chair waved his hand and said, "Ho, if it isn't the young Lance." Arthur Lewin looked at him and smiled nervously. "I see the meetings have taken a toll on you." The old man yawned and stretched his arms. "I didn't even want to join this little club in the first place, but it couldn't be helped. My back hasn't been this sore since the days my mother used to whip me as a child." Arthur stepped forward with Sylvie. "Councilman. Councilwoman." Virion Erelith looked at him. "You've finally arrived." The Elven Queen and Princess welcomed Arthur back, while Queen Priscilla Glader said calmly, "You've come at a good time, General Arthur." Prince Curtis Glader, holding a stack of documents, added, "Yes, we were waiting for your return to continue discussing your report." Arthur glanced at Virion, confused. "Continue?" Virion smirked and tapped his finger, as if to say, "Did you really think you could avoid this meeting?" Arthur sighed inwardly. "That's why I sent a transmission scroll with all the necessary information." As Arthur and Sylvie took their seats, Virion spoke, "General Arthur, your report mentioned 2 separate but coordinated attacks near Elenwar. Is that correct?" Arthur nodded. "Yes, that is correct. I have nothing new to add." Prince Curtis spoke up, "Then let's get straight to the point. I believe we should keep our forces as they are and send reinforcements to the Elshire Forest only when necessary." The Elven Queen looked at him seriously. "Councilman Blaine, your suggestion implies that you do not consider Elven territory worth defending." Curtis frowned. "Don't twist my words, Councilwoman Muriel. This has been the enemy's only attempt to enter Elven territory. Compare that to the near-daily attacks on the wall. It should be obvious that protecting Sapin's borders takes priority." The Elven Prince responded firmly, "No one is saying that defending the Elshire Forest should take priority over Sapin. However, just as Elven soldiers are stationed at the wall to help protect Sapin, there should be a consistent defense along the forest borders as well." Queen Priscilla waved her hand dismissively. "The Elshire Forest itself is a natural defense. Its mana-laden fog has deterred outsiders for generations. The attacks from yesterday would have failed eventually, even if those units had been left alone." The Elven Queen clenched her fists in anger. Across the table, the old Earth Mage tapped his fingers silently. Priscilla continued, "The Alacrians and beasts would have gotten lost and starved long before reaching any of Elenwar's cities, even those near the borders." Suddenly, the Elven Prince shouted, "The forest is still part of the kingdom of Elenwar. There are tribes living outside the main cities. By your logic, we might as well abandon the wall in Sapin and sacrifice the border cities to reduce the land we need to protect." Prince Curtis snapped back, "That is not a fair comparison. If Sapin were to fall, even its outermost cities, the Alacrians could march straight into the heart of your lands as well." The Elven Queen narrowed her eyes. "Watch your tone, Councilman. You speak as if the elves owe you something, yet we have sent many mages to help defend against the Alacrians. If even a fraction of those forces were assigned to guard our forest, this meeting would not be necessary." Queen Priscilla replied calmly, "The truth remains, Muriel. While the Elshire Forest is part of your kingdom, no elven city or town has faced direct battle." The Elven Prince sighed, placing a hand on his forehead. "All we are asking is to recall some of our soldiers to Elenwar so they can defend their homeland." Curtis responded sharply, "Those soldiers are no longer yours alone. Have you forgotten? The Council was formed to unite the 3 races against an outside threat. Our duty is to remain impartial and lead the entire continent to victory over the Alacrians." The Elven Prince fired back, "You speak of impartiality, yet you focus only on what benefits your own kingdom." Suddenly, Virion slammed his hand down, releasing a burst of mana that shook the room. "Enough. I've heard both sides. Before you reduce yourselves further by arguing like spoiled children, I will speak." The room fell silent. "Based on the pattern of attacks, Sapin remains the primary target for the Alacrians," Virion continued. "The easiest path to the major cities of both Sapin and Elenwar is through the northern range of the Grand Mountains, and through the wall. We must assume the enemy knows this and will continue focusing their efforts there." He paused before adding, "As for Elenwar's defense, we will relocate several Trailblazer units to the dungeons near the southern border. If another incursion occurs, they can emerge and provide immediate support." Prince Curtis nodded. Don't worry, Alduin. The Elves' higher forest is vast, and its fog is a powerful deterrent. As things stand, Elenwar will remain safe. Alduin lowered his head, still looking troubled, but said nothing. The scene shifted to the Elenwar forest. Deep within the dark woods, the Alacrians were using their magic all around. Their spells spread across the trees as they worked. One of the Alacrians, holding mana in his hand, spoke to another. How much longer do you need, Circe? My veiling barrier won't last much longer, especially while covering such a wide area. Circe looked up, her magic already flowing into a massive tree. Done, she replied calmly. After clearing one of the 3 points of the array, Circe lowered her hand and said, It's done. One of the Alacrians turned with relief. Finally. As he stepped forward, Circe's eyes shifted toward him, her expression firm. Don't celebrate just yet. There's still 1 point left. Raising her hand again, she began casting the spell. The 3-point array slowly started to connect. Behind her, another Alacrian stepped forward and created a protective barrier with his magic, shielding them as the 3rd point formed. As the final connection was completed, a faint glow pulsed between all 3 points. Circe exhaled softly. The 3-point array is stabilized. A female Alacrian smiled slightly. Good job, Circe. Now let's move before any elves find us. Circe lifted her hand again, using her magic to scout the surrounding area. Her vision extended far beyond the forest, searching for any signs of enemies. After confirming the area was clear, she waved her hand. This way, she ordered. The group followed her deeper into the forest. I don't even know how long it's been since we started this mission, Circe thought as they moved forward. We've been on edge for too long. They continued setting up more 3-point arrays in different locations. Some Alacrians stayed behind to guard each completed point, while Circe worked on forming the next array. As they advanced further into the forest, Circe's thoughts grew heavier. We're coming across more and more fallen allies. Ahead of them, several bodies of their subordinates lay scattered on the ground. The sight made the group fall silent. The deeper they went, the thicker the fog became, covering the forest in a dense veil. Visibility dropped, and the silence grew suffocating. Only the sound of their footsteps echoed faintly. Suddenly, one of the Alacrian girls raised her hand, stopping Circe in her tracks. The entire group froze. Their eyes widened at what lay ahead. One of the Alacrians stepped closer, examining the scene. These spikes. They're not sharpened. They've been twisted into this shape. Plant magic, another muttered. A different Alacrian turned angrily toward Circe. I thought you said this path was safe. Circe wiped the sweat from her face, keeping her voice steady. We'll have to stop here so I can scout another route. It's hard enough navigating this forest without their constant complaints, she thought, frustration flickering in her mind. They soon found a place to rest, climbing up into the massive branches of towering trees. Sitting atop one of the thick branches, they took out their food. Circe sat calmly, gazing into the distance. Merciful Vritra. Nearby, one Alacrian tossed a piece of food toward a girl, who caught it effortlessly. Sitting beside her, another spoke with a sigh. We didn't set as many arrays as we planned today. The girl nodded slightly. But we still managed to push further into the forest. Circe thought, it's not easy keeping these arrays undetectable. If there's even the slightest mana leakage, the elves will sense it. One of the Alacrians, eating casually, muttered, we could have gone even further if Circe wasn't so slow. Circe heard him but remained quiet. Fane's hostility is only slightly more annoying than Maeve treating me like a child, she thought. Beside her, Cole smiled warmly and held out a piece of food. Hey Circe. I saved the biggest piece for you. Circe hesitated, taking it nervously. Which is still far less annoying than Cole's interest in me, she added in her thoughts. As they ate, Cole glanced at Fane. Don't act like you didn't need a break, Fane. Fane leaned back against the tree. I'd rather get this mission over with. Their quiet conversation faded, and Circe's thoughts turned heavy again. They've trained together for years for this mission. But I've only known them for a few weeks. If their sentry hadn't died the same time I received my emblem, I wouldn't even be here. One of the Alacrian girls spoke up, her tone practical. You know we can't go any deeper into the forest safely. Not until Circe's emblem recovers. Circe lowered her gaze. But that doesn't change the fact that this mission's success depends on me. Fane rested his head back against the tree and said calmly, it's not like we're the only team out here. Cole nodded. Yeah. Maybe one of the others has already secured a route. Silence settled over the group. Out of all the teams, we're the most likely to succeed, Circe thought. Even with my lack of experience, my emblem gives us a clear advantage. Suddenly she stood up. I won't be able to use my emblem again for another day after this, she said. A faint mark on her back began to glow as she activated her power. Mystery of true sense. It allows me to see all 4 elemental mana particles, she thought. But for now, wind attribute mana is enough. She focused, scanning the surrounding area. Mana particles gathered toward her, flowing back into her body. Her breathing grew heavy as the strain took its toll. Fane looked at her. Well? Were you successful, Circe? Cole quickly stood, concern flashing across his face as he saw her condition. Circe steadied herself, then looked at Fane and gave a faint smile. The kingdom itself is still too far. But I found a large area with strong mana fluctuations. It's about a day's travel from here. One of the Alacrian girls leaned forward. A settlement? A town? Cole's face lit up. So we're heading the right way. Good. That means all of this hasn't been for nothing. He smiled proudly. Great job, Circe. Really, great work. Even Fane allowed a small smile. As expected from a member of the Millview blood. I was starting to wonder if you truly belonged to that lineage. One of the girls narrowed her eyes. Fane, don't. Before she could finish, all of them suddenly froze. They felt it, a presence. Circe turned sharply, stepping forward. Her expression hardened as she raised a hand to shield her eyes, focusing into the distance. Elves, she said quietly. Her voice grew tense. 3 of them. The scene shifted to the castle, where the council was gathered for a meeting. Arthur Lewin stood before them and spoke calmly. Since the matter of Elenwar has been decided, I would like to update the council on what I've learned from the latest interrogation. The room fell silent as all eyes turned to him. Arthur continued recounting everything he had discovered, both from his recent battle and from the Alacrian he had interrogated. He spoke in detail about their runes, their unique combat styles, and the abilities they possessed. Each word carried weight, painting a clearer picture of the enemy they were facing. After hearing Arthur Lewin, Virion Erelus stroked his beard thoughtfully. It seems we've been underestimating the abilities of Alacrian mages, he said. Underestimating? Blaine Glader replied with a frown. If anything, learning how limited their magic is makes me think we've been overestimating those Alacrian bastards. Alduin Erelith, the Elven King, nodded in agreement. I have to agree with Councilman Blaine. This seems like a clear weakness in their fighting tactics. An elderly council member spoke up, his tone calm but firm. I don't think it's that simple. The room quieted as he continued. On the surface, their specialization may appear to be a weakness. However, from what General Arthur Lewin has discovered, their method of awakening and training in magic is far more advanced than ours. The Muriel Erelith, Queen of the Elves, leaned forward slightly. How so? This is only speculation, the old man replied, but based on their system of marks and crests, Alacrian mages seem to focus intensely on a single spell, refining it, evolving it, and mastering every possible variation. He paused before continuing. While mages of Dicathan train in a wide range of spells within their elemental attributes, these Alacrian mages devote their entire lives to perfecting just one. His voice grew heavier. On the battlefield, versatile mages are not always as effective as specialized soldiers who excel at one thing. The scene shifted to the forest. 3 elves stood facing the Alacrians, their bows drawn, arrows glowing with magic as they aimed at their enemies. A magical arrow shot forward, cutting through the air towards Circe. Circe reacted instantly, rushing forward. Behind her, Cole cast a protective barrier just in time. The arrow struck the barrier and shattered, falling harmlessly to the ground. Without slowing down, Circe charged ahead. One of the elves focused on her, leaping forward with a spear aimed to strike. But in a swift motion, Circe closed the distance, driving her weapon into the elf's back. The elf screamed as the blade pierced through, blood spilling as he collapsed. The scene shifted back to the castle's council chamber. The old man continued, We must send this information to our captains, as well as to the guilds and military academies. They need to develop strategies to counter these specialized mages. Arthur spoke calmly. I've already stopped by the wall and informed the captains there. Virion nodded approvingly. Good. Then let us proceed to discuss how best to deploy our forces. As the council continued their discussions, Arthur Lewin took a slow, heavy breath. Just as I expected. The meeting has turned into a full-blown debate. Around him, the council members argued once again about where their resources were most needed. Bund had made it clear that he and his loyalists would take charge of eradicating the Alacrian supporters in Darv. However, the Alacrians had already used underground tunnels to move their forces toward the Darv-Sapien border. Worse still, Alacrian ships had been sighted along the western shores of Sapien. As a result, Telmor, Etistan, and Maber were forced to strengthen defenses not only along the eastern front, in case the wall failed, but also along their western borders. Alduin Erelith made another appeal regarding Elenwar. With recent disturbances coming from the Beast Glades, it was possible that the Alacrian forces in the north were actually heading east toward Elven territory. In the end, It was decided to send Aya and Elder Camus to survey the southern border before deploying any full units. Virion Erelith nodded. This will serve as a temporary solution. At least until Lord Alder and the Azuras contact us again. Arthur's expression darkened. He remembered a past encounter, when the leader of Alakria had taken control of Sylvie. The Azuras will no longer aid you in this war. Winsam, Alder. All of them have abandoned you and Dicathan. The memory lingered. Arthur lowered his hand slightly, his voice turning somber. Actually, I have news regarding that as well. After explaining what he had learned, the room fell into tense silence. Virion suddenly slammed his hand onto the table and stood up. Those conceited sons of. As if it wasn't enough that they used us and this war for their own purposes. They broke their own treaty to attack the Vritra. And they still failed. He turned away in frustration. Experiments. 1 in 5 mages. His voice hardened. What else did Agrona say in that message? Muriel Erelith spoke up, her tone uneasy. And how exactly did you receive this message from Agrona? Arthur paused for a moment. Sylvie still doesn't know that Agrona took control of her body. It's better if they believe it came from another Alacrian. He answered calmly. Agrona temporarily possessed one of the captured soldiers to deliver the message. Possessed? The Queen repeated, clearly shaken. Arthur continued. He used the failed assault as leverage, forcing the Azuras and Ephiotis to cut off all communication with us. The old councilman nodded slowly. That explains why we haven't seen more sides or retainers. He likely kept his strongest forces in Alakria in case something like this happened. Muriel's expression tightened. But that raises another concern. Will they come to Dicathan now? The gates they hid in the Beast Glades. What if the retainers and sides are already here? The Queen of Sapin responded. There haven't been any teleportation gate sightings for months, not since the last one was destroyed. One soldier reported seeing an Alacrian mage halfway through a portal before it collapsed. The mage died within seconds. She continued, for now, the Trailblazer Division is focused on eliminating corrupted beasts and their controllers. The Prince of Sapin added then. Should we expect them to arrive by ship from the western coast? If that's the case, no amount of wall building will make a difference. Arthur listened quietly. Even Blaine is beginning to doubt the wall. His thoughts drifted. In my past life, wars between nations were rare. Kings settled conflicts through paragon duels. Despite all the lessons Lady Vera drilled into me about warfare, suddenly, Virion clapped his hands, cutting through the tension. We have much to consider, he said firmly. But for now, I suggest we rest. A clear mind makes better decisions than an exhausted one. We'll reconvene at sunrise. Arthur remained silent. Even with all the strategic games she made me practice. Nothing truly prepares you for this. The council members began to leave the room. The old man stretched and yawned. Honestly, I'd rather throw myself onto the battlefield and fight face to face than sit through another meeting like this. Arthur let out a quiet laugh at that. One by one, the others exited, and the chamber doors slowly closed. Left alone, Arthur stood still, his expression heavy. Nothing really prepares you for the weight of these conversations. Lost in thought, he didn't notice the soft presence behind him, until Sylvie gently placed a hand on his shoulder. After the meeting, Arthur Lewin and Sylvie arrived at their room. Feeling exhausted, Arthur removed his royal jacket and sat down on the bed, letting out a deep breath. Sylvie looked at him with a calm smile before saying, Do you want to see what I've been practicing? Using her magic, she transformed the scales on her body into different clothes. Enjoying Arthur's reaction, she smiled proudly and said, I can mold my scales into different outfits now. Arthur looked at her in amazement, and gave a small clap. Then, as Sylvie sat down on a chair, Arthur asked, What else can you do? Swinging her feet back and forth, Sylvie replied, I've mostly been focused on functioning in this bipedal form. She smiled gently before continuing, apart from the lack of stability these silly legs provide. I can understand why the Azuras prefer this form. Arthur smiled. Oh? Do tell. Arthur thought to himself that although Sylvie and he had shared thousands of conversations through their minds, casually talking like this felt refreshing. Looking at her hand, Sylvie explained, mana manipulation, and even using ether, is somehow easier in this form than in any other. Arthur immediately understood. So that was why the Indraths appeared as humans instead of dragons. Then he asked, What are your magic capabilities like now that the seal has been broken? Because the Indrath clan are ether users. Sylvie began. She raised her hand, gathering mana around it. Most of my mana manipulation abilities revolve around strengthening my body. But I can also release a large amount of mana at once. Arthur looked at her nervously. Sylvie? Please don't destroy this room. Or the castle. Laughing softly while holding the mana in her hand, Sylvie teased, Is the mighty lance scared of a little girl now? Arthur laughed. Those jagged horns kind of ruined the little girl part, Besides, you still stumble over your own feet, Sylvie. Let's not endanger everyone in the castle. With a smirk, Sylvie snapped her fingers, causing the mana to disappear. I'm glad I was able to break the seal. I'll be much more useful out in the field now. Her expression softened slightly. But there's still a part of me that feels foreign. I know there's far more to my abilities than I can currently imagine. Arthur looked at her reassuringly. Well, you'll have plenty of opportunities for self-discovery. You heard what they said during the meeting. Things are only going to get more hectic from here on. Hearing that, Sylvie fell silent for a moment. Then she leaned back in her chair with a laugh and said, At least we'll have each other to rely on. Once I gain better control over this form. She raised her fist excitedly. I feel like the two of us defeating a scythe won't be impossible. Arthur chuckled. Won't be impossible, huh? Leaning back onto the bed, Arthur closed his eyes and replied calmly, Not the best odds, but definitely better than before. Sylvie laughed and jumped onto the bed beside him. Then she looked at Arthur and said, If we have time, we should spar before going on a mission. I'd like to test the extent of my control over ether in this form. In a relaxed tone, Arthur answered, We'll be lucky if we even get a good night's sleep without being disturbed. Sylvie buried her face into the bed and groaned, You jinxed it. Just then, a knock echoed through the room. Arthur opened the door to find a soldier standing outside. The soldier saluted respectfully and said, I apologize for the disturbance, General Arthur, but Commander Virion wishes to see you in the dungeon. Arthur frowned in surprise before following the soldier down into the dungeon. When he arrived, he noticed that everyone was already gathered there. After seeing Arthur, Virion Erelith nodded and said, Good. Everyone's here. An old man stroked his beard and asked, What is all this about? The elven prince added curiously, Yes, why couldn't this wait until morning? Virion replied, I called all of you here because this man, he gestured toward the person beside him, Ento, informed me that Gentry finally managed to get one of the prisoners to talk. The Queen of Sapin asked sharply, Who? The retainer? Virion glanced at Ento before answering, I'm not sure. Arthur, now curious himself, asked, And where's Gentry now? Shouldn't we go inside instead of waiting out here? Ento bowed his head slightly. Master Gentry will be here soon. Suddenly, the door burst open, smoke pouring in from the entrance along with the figure who had pushed it open. It was Master Gentry, wiping his bloody hands with a piece of cloth as he stepped inside. After seeing him, Virion Erelith immediately asked, Gentry, what exactly is going on? Gentry bowed apologetically. My apologies, everyone. I was just finishing maintenance on the retainer's restraint system when he called for me. Virion frowned. What did the retainer say? Did you finally break him? Tell us. Unfortunately, no, Gentry replied. Hearing that, the Elven Queen shouted angrily, Then why did you feel the need to drag us down here at this godforsaken hour? Her husband placed a hand on her shoulder, trying to calm her down. Adjusting his glasses while still holding the blood-stained cloth, Gentry continued nervously, I have yet to break the retainer. However, thanks to yours truly. The traitor Radias has finally spoken. The room immediately fell silent. But Gentry added, He will only speak to General Arthur. At those words, everyone turned toward Arthur Lewin, who himself looked equally surprised. The dwarven elder slammed his fist angrily. That traitor split the dwarven kingdom in two, ruined our reputation, and left me to clean up his mess. Who is he to make demands? The Prince of Sapin asked curiously, Do you think he's trying to strike some kind of deal with General Arthur? The Elven Queen placed a hand on her chin thoughtfully. If he simply wanted to negotiate, he would have spoken to Commander Virion or another member of the council. Virion looked toward Arthur. Perhaps it's because of your connection to Elijah? Arthur lowered his head slightly and replied in a troubled voice, That's what I'm afraid of. He clenched his fist as countless memories of Elijah Knight flashed through his mind. The first time they met in the dungeon, barely surviving together. The days they spent happily attending the academy side by side. And the moments when Elijah, overwhelmed with sadness, leaned on Arthur for comfort. Suddenly, Gentry cleared his throat, drawing everyone's attention back to him. Council members, Lance, he said carefully, it has been extremely difficult to get the traitor to speak. Perhaps it would be best to take advantage of this opportunity while he is still willing and able to talk. Once again, all eyes shifted toward Arthur. Arthur looked at Virion, who silently nodded, giving him permission. Lead the way, Gentry, Arthur said before stepping forward. The two of them walked deeper into the dungeon, leaving the others behind. Meanwhile, far away in the forest, an Alacrian soldier named Circe sat peacefully beside the edge of a river. Folding his legs comfortably, he dipped his feet into the cool water while washing the blood from his arms. As he splashed water onto himself, he thought with satisfaction, sneaking away from camp was definitely worth it. Moving his feet lazily through the river, he continued thinking, It's not like I didn't take precautions first. I understand why Maeve is worried, but we've managed to avoid all the elves so far. He washed his face with water before sighing. Besides, how am I supposed to complete my mission covered in blood and grime? Suddenly, the sound of rustling leaves echoed behind him. Circe's eyes immediately shifted toward the noise. It was Cole. Cole? Circe asked in surprise. Why did you follow me? Can you maintain the barrier from here? Cole shook his head nervously. I can't. I just wanted to make sure you were okay. Circe quickly put his shoes back on and stood up. We shouldn't be here. Let's get back to the others. Covering his face in frustration, he muttered. Fane will skin me alive if he finds out we both abandoned our posts. Suddenly, Circe noticed something in the distance. His eyes widened instantly. That's... Cole looked at him in confusion, but before he could ask anything, 4 arrows infused with mana shot toward them from the darkness. Run, Circe! Cole shouted as he immediately started sprinting away. At the same moment, Circe raised his magic, deflecting the incoming arrows midair and changing their direction as the 2 of them fled through the forest. While running through the forest, Circe shouted, I can sense 3 of them. We have to hurry back to camp. It's risky, but Fane and Maeve will be ready to fight. Cole followed closely behind him, maintaining his magic barrier to block the incoming arrows. As the 2 of them ran faster, one of the elven soldiers continued chasing them through the trees. Circe quickly pointed behind them. They're getting closer, Cole warned. Suddenly, a figure burst out from behind a tree. It was Fane. With incredible speed, Fane thrust his spear forward and slashed directly at the pursuing elf. At the same moment, the second elf fired another arrow in frustration. Fane immediately rushed toward him. But before the arrow could hit, Cole expanded his barrier to protect him. Nearby, Maeve raised flames in her hand, preparing her magic. Fane drove his spear straight into the elf's stomach, killing him instantly. At the same time, the third elf charged toward Cole and Circe while Cole's attention remained focused on protecting Fane. The elf swung his blade toward Cole. Clang! A spear blocked the attack at the last second. It was Fane again, reacting instantly to save Cole. Then Maeve raised her hand and shouted, Watch your back! Fane quickly stepped aside as Maeve released a burst of fire magic directly at the elf. The flame struck him head-on, sending him crashing to the ground as his body burned. For a brief moment, the group stood there catching their breath. Then Fane turned toward Circe and angrily shouted, What the hell happened? Circe lowered his head nervously. Before he could explain, Maeve placed a hand on Fane's chest and said firmly, Explanations later. We need to get out of here first. Fane clicked his tongue and looked away, while Maeve kept her eyes on Circe. That was when she noticed something strange. Circe was trembling in place, sweat dripped down his face, and his eyes were filled with fear. Circe? Maeve asked cautiously. The others noticed his expression as well and immediately turned toward him. With a shaking voice, Circe whispered, More elves are coming. His face turned pale as he continued, A lot of them. As Radius sat inside the prison, his entire body was covered in blood and wounds, while heavy chains tightly restrained his hands and feet. The moment he heard the prison door creak open, he quickly lowered his head in respect. As Arthur Leywin stepped forward, Radius bowed deeper and spoke softly. My gratitude for your time and presence. Allow me to begin. Arthur frowned in confusion. Begin? Radius slowly raised his head and began to recite a poem, his voice echoing throughout the dark prison cell. A lad of humble origins, born wrapped in rags within a sorrowful little town. Hearing those words, Arthur was startled for a brief moment. However, Radius continued, Yet he was destined for far more. Born from and for a life of renown. And as with all heroes to be. As the poem went on, memories flashed through Arthur's mind. The lad had the looks, and the lad had the might. His mother taught him of the world, while his father taught him how to fight. His blood knew well they could no longer contain the fire raging within him, burning hotter than a king's funeral pyre. Radius smiled faintly despite the pain covering his body. Until the day came when the lad realized there was a far greater stage awaiting him. So they packed their bags and bid their small town farewell. His expression darkened, but woe. As all stories go, tragedy struck. Arthur remained silent, while Radius continued his recital. Yet never fret, never doubt, because as all stories go, a hero never falls so easily. So he grows and he grows. Through heartache and death throes. Never ceasing. Always overcoming. Radius slowly lifted his eyes toward Arthur. Alas, every light requires a shadow. Every hero requires a foe. The brighter the light, the darker the night. Arthur's expression gradually became more confused as he listened. What happens, hero to be, when the one who has crossed both time and space shines even brighter than thee? Perhaps one maiden's shining night is another's deadly blight. Will the sides of light and darkness only be decided? Suddenly, Radius grabbed Arthur's hand tightly and asked in a trembling voice, by whoever wins the final fight? Arthur's eyes widened in shock. He immediately pulled his hand away, causing Radius to collapse onto the ground. Lying there, Radius looked up at Arthur and laughed weakly. Ah. Good. You're real. I feared you were merely another illusion, and that one of my performances had gone to waste. I practiced this many times, you know. I had almost forgotten how warm another person could be. Arthur narrowed his eyes coldly. It seems your time spent here has made you unbalanced. Radius slowly pulled himself upright, gripping a broken branch beside him for support, as he laughed painfully. Unbalanced? Not crazy, insane, or mad? Perhaps cracked or nutty. But unbalanced? He chuckled before continuing. Regardless, whether you choose to ignore my words, poetry or prose alike, is entirely your own decision. Arthur stared at him carefully. So that poem you just recited. Radius leaned back against the wall, his body trembling with pain. I thought a simple heart-to-heart conversation would be rather boring. And though I'm not particularly skilled in the art of poetry, I needed some way to pass the time. Then he looked directly into Arthur's eyes. Or perhaps, this is merely the rambling of a man who has become unbalanced. Arthur continued staring at him silently. Radius smirked weakly. My rhyming may have been somewhat elementary. But it was catchy, was it not? Suddenly, Arthur slammed his fist into the wall beside Radius, causing deep cracks to spread across the stone. His voice turned cold with anger. I don't think you understand the gravity of your situation, Radius. You're going to remain here for a very long time, and it will not be pleasant. How much you cooperate with the council, how much information you provide to Dicathlon, will determine exactly how unpleasant your imprisonment becomes. Radius coughed painfully as Arthur's hand tightened around his neck. His weakened body trembled while he struggled to breathe. After a moment, Arthur released him and stepped back. Now is not the time to worry about whether your rhymes are catchy or not. Radius held his neck, coughing heavily before replying with a faint smile. I know precisely what sort of position I'm in. And I've already told you exactly what I wish to say. Whatever meaning you gain from it is none of my concern. Arthur glared at him angrily, yet remained silent. The scene shifted to the room of Arthur Lewin, where Arthur sat alone at his desk, writing a report about the strange information Radius had revealed to him. As the pen moved across the paper, Arthur let out a frustrated sigh. I'm so frustrated I can barely think straight. He tapped his fingers against the desk while holding his head in exhaustion. I hope I'm remembering this correctly. His eyes drifted toward the unfinished report as he continued thinking. The main message I got from that poem was about a hero. But there was something more hidden within it. It almost felt as if it had something to do with me. Arthur narrowed his eyes thoughtfully. But how did Radius know details about my childhood? Not only did I grow up in a humble town like Ashbur, but he also mentioned the lad leaving his town behind before tragedy struck. He clenched his teeth. He couldn't have learned all of that from a simple background check through the council. Something about this doesn't feel right. Arthur leaned back in his chair, deep in thought. Does the brighter the light, the darker the night refer to my enemies becoming stronger as I grow stronger myself? Confusion continued to cloud his mind. But then, what did the shining night and the deadly blight mean? He couldn't understand the true message Radius was trying to convey. Frustrated, Arthur slammed his hand against the table before suddenly standing up from his chair. After pacing around the room for a moment, he finally collapsed onto his bed. What if none of it means anything at all? He covered his face with one hand. What if this was all just a way to gain attention? Or create confusion? Arthur stared silently at the ceiling. Hopefully he's willing to perform an encore. As those thoughts crossed his mind, fragments of his past life suddenly resurfaced within his memories. A large house appeared in his mind, with rainwater pouring heavily outside. The sharp sound of a wooden stick echoed through the air before striking against someone's arm. I'm in pain, Grace shouted nervously. I thought I dodged that. Standing before him, his instructor calmly held the wooden stick in her hand. You're focusing too much on my weapon, she said sternly. She raised the stick slightly. Your vision should encompass your opponent as a whole. So tell me, what do you see? What's different about me? Gray rubbed his aching arm and replied cautiously, aside from the obvious. Before he could finish, the stick struck him once again. His teacher glared at him while lowering the stick. Don't get smart with me, kid. His teacher smiled faintly and asked, well? As Gray stood there rubbing his sore arm, memories resurfaced in his mind. Several months had passed since his capture and subsequent rescue by Lady Vera. After his injuries had fully healed, his lessons under her guidance had finally begun. Though her training methods were brutal and her personality was as warm as a block of ice, Gray couldn't deny that she was an incredibly effective teacher. Vera pointed toward the ground with a wooden stick in her hand. You pivoted using your lead leg, bringing your back foot forward to extend your reach. As she spoke, Vera calmly folded her hands behind her back and began walking around him. Good. Although, if you weren't able to figure that out from the track marks on the ground, then you wouldn't deserve to be my. Before she could finish, Gray smirked teasingly and interrupted her. Then I don't deserve to be your student? For a brief moment, Vera stared at him silently before tapping the back of his head with the stick and pushing him forward. Gray sighed inwardly. Despite her cold attitude, her home alone revealed just how wealthy and influential she truly was. The two eventually stopped beside a large fish pond. Standing near the water, Gray looked at Vera curiously. How do I get better? Vera answered calmly. Try catching a fish with your bare hands. Gray blinked in surprise as he stared into the clear pond. Whoa! I've never even seen a live fish before. Then Vera added, without using ki. Gray immediately looked at her in disbelief. What? He glanced back at the fish nervously. Won't they die if they leave the water? I don't think I could afford to replace even one of these. Vera sighed. Don't worry about that. Just try. Gray hesitantly stepped into the pond and reached toward one of the fish. The instant his fingers touched it, the fish slipped away effortlessly. So fast. He tried again. And again. And again. Yet no matter how hard he tried, he couldn't catch even a single fish. He used both hands, lunged forward several times, and even splashed water everywhere, but the fish always escaped him with ease. Finally exhausted, Gray sat at the edge of the pond and looked at Vera in frustration. What's the point of this anyway? He stood back up angrily. It's impossible to catch one with your bare hands. Without saying a word, Vera stepped into the pond herself. She slowly lowered her hand into the water and effortlessly caught one of the fish. Is that so? Gray stared at her in shock. Yes, it is. There's no way you can. His eyes widened as he saw the fish calmly resting in her hand. What? No way. He pointed at her immediately. Do it again. Sure. Vera gently released the fish back into the pond before slowly lowering her hand into the water once more. A moment later, she caught another fish just as easily as before. Then she smiled faintly. Gray looked at her with complete disbelief. I don't get it. You moved so slowly. Suddenly, suspicion appeared on his face. Wait. Did you train these fish to swim into your hands? Vera raised an eyebrow. Do I look like someone who would waste my time doing something so pointless? Gray scratched his cheek awkwardly. I guess not. Vera released the fish back into the water. I did this to show you something. You and these fish, these tiny creatures that managed to make a fool out of you, are similar. Before Gray could respond, Vera suddenly struck toward him with her hand. Gray reacted instantly and dodged backward without hesitation. Vera's eyes narrowed slightly. Your reaction speed is fast. Frighteningly fast. She lowered her hand. But it's instinctual. Untamed. Just like these fish. Gray frowned in confusion. I don't understand. What do you mean by untamed? Lady Vera calmly explained. By the time your opponent's muscles flex in preparation for a punch, your brain has already sent a signal to your body to react. Against students or inexperienced fighters, this gives you a tremendous advantage. She slowly walked around Gray while continuing her explanation. However, if this ability remains untrained, stronger opponents will easily predict how you intend to dodge. Just as I predicted the fish would surge forward the moment I reached for it. Gray nervously rubbed the back of his head before smiling slightly. So how do I tame this ability? By learning to respond. Gray blinked in confusion. Isn't that the same thing? Vera gently tapped him on the head. One is intentional. The other is instinctual. She folded her arms behind her back. So far, we've only focused on basic conditioning. But I think you're finally ready to begin learning how to properly respond to attacks, instead of merely reacting to them. Gray's eyes lit up immediately. So now comes the fun part. Vera stared at him expressionlessly. Fun for me. Gray let out a defeated sigh. Just as Vera was about to continue speaking, a butler hurried toward them. Ma'am. Mr. Gray has received an urgent call from a Mr. Nico. Gray immediately turned toward him. The butler continued anxiously. It seems there was some kind of explosion at Whitholm. The enforcers have locked down the school and ordered all students and staff to stay away until further notice. Hearing those words, Gray's face turned pale. He covered his mouth in shock. Oh my God. Nico. Vera stepped forward calmly. Go, Gray. See to your friend. Then return. Gray quickly nodded, but before he could leave, Vera spoke once more. And remember this. Gray paused and looked back at her. A panicked man may drown in a puddle, while a calm man may swim across the ocean. Her sharp eyes remained fixed on him. Since your classes seem to be cancelled for today, we'll continue working on your reactions later. Gray immediately climbed out of the pond and sprinted away as fast as he could toward the city to meet his friends. Behind him, Vera stood silently beside the water, watching him disappear into the distance. Gray rushed through the halls. A strange sense of dread tightened around his chest as he sprinted toward the communication room. Without slowing down, Gray grabbed the communication receiver the instant he reached it. "Nico," he called out immediately. "Nico, are you there?" For a brief moment, only static answered him. Then, finally, Gray. Nico's trembling voice came through the line. The fear in his voice immediately made Gray's stomach sink. "Nico, what happened?" Gray asked quickly. "Are you okay?" On the other side of the call, Nico sounded completely panicked. "I don't know what's happening," he stammered. "I checked it a few days ago and everything was fine. It was working perfectly." Gray frowned in confusion. "What are you talking about?" Then Nico's breathing became uneven. "The key restrainer," he whispered. "It must have malfunctioned." Gray's eyes widened slightly. Then Nico said the words that made his chest tighten. "This is all my fault." Gray immediately tried calming him down. "Slow down," he said firmly. "What are you blaming yourself for? You're not making any sense." There was another pause. Then finally Nico spoke again. "It's Cecilia." The moment Gray heard her name, his expression hardened. "What happened to Cecilia?" Nico inhaled shakily before answering. "She had another accident." Gray's grip on the receiver tightened. His mind instantly went back to all the previous incidents, Cecilia's uncontrollable power, the strange surges of ki, the dangerous outbursts she could barely suppress. But from Nico's terrified voice alone, Gray already knew this incident had to be far worse than the others. "Gray," Nico said desperately. "Can you come to the academy right now?" Gray stayed silent for a moment. "The enforcers are here," Nico continued nervously. "They've been questioning everyone, conducting interviews, and asking all kinds of questions." His breathing became more frantic. "I'm scared, Gray." That single sentence hit harder than anything else. "I think they're going to take her away." Gray's eyes narrowed immediately. "Please," Nico begged quietly. "Come as soon as you can." For several seconds, Gray said nothing. Then, finally, he asked the question he feared the most. "Is Cecilia alive?" Nico answered immediately. "Yes, she's alive." Gray let out a quiet sigh of relief, but Nico continued. "She's okay physically, I think. But they locked her up." Gray closed his eyes for a moment. "This time was really bad," Nico whispered. "She destroyed part of the administration building." Silence filled the room around Gray. Inside his mind, conflicting thoughts clashed against one another. If he asked Lady Vera for permission to leave, would she allow it? Probably not. Vera would most likely tell him to stay focused on his future, avoid unnecessary distractions, and let the enforcers handle the situation. And honestly, part of Gray knew she would probably be right. Still, hearing Nico sound this terrified twisted something painfully inside him. Gray tried to find a way out of the situation without directly refusing. "The enforcers told everyone to stay away from the academy," he said carefully. "Even if I came, they probably wouldn't let me inside." He forced his voice to sound convincing. "I want to help, but there's not much I can do right now." On the other end, Nico fell silent for a moment before speaking again. "Then maybe we can meet somewhere else," he suggested quickly. "We need to figure out what to do if they really try to take Cecilia away." Gray's chest tightened. He could hear the desperation in Nico's voice, the fear and helplessness. And yet, Gray panicked internally. He didn't want to get dragged into this situation. Not now. Not when his future was finally beginning to change. Not when Vera had already started shaping him into something greater. Gray swallowed hard before trying once again to calm Nico down. "No, listen to me," he said firmly. "We don't even know what's going to happen yet. Panicking won't help anyone." Then, almost unconsciously, he repeated the same words Vera had told him earlier that day. "A panicked man can drown in a puddle," Gray said slowly, trying to remember the exact quote. "But a calm man can swim across an ocean." Or something like that. He rubbed his forehead awkwardly. "The point is, we need to stay calm." Nico took a shaky breath. "Yeah." For a moment, it sounded like he was trying to steady himself. But then he quietly asked again, "So, where should we meet?" Gray froze. Guilt struck him immediately. But instead of agreeing, he shut the idea down completely. "I can't come," Gray said flatly. "I have lessons." The moment the words left his mouth, the atmosphere changed. Gray quickly continued before Nico could respond. "Don't worry so much. Everything's going to be fine." Even as he said it, the words sounded hollow. Still, he kept going. "You just need to keep your head down and avoid causing trouble." Then Gray tried to justify it further, both to Nico and to himself. Maybe this could actually help Cecilia in the long run. If important people notice her condition, maybe she'll finally get proper treatment. He lowered his voice slightly. "Then she won't have to rely only on your inventions anymore. The line became quiet. When Nico finally spoke again, his voice sounded smaller somehow. Okay. There was disappointment in his voice, and Gray could hear it clearly. But Nico still tried to hold himself together. Sorry, Nico said softly. I know you already have a lot on your plate trying to become king and all. Gray immediately felt worse after hearing that. So I'll let you go now. Gray tightened his grip on the receiver. Call me once you know what the enforcers decide to do, he said. Sure, Nico replied weakly. Then the call ended. The room fell silent. Gray slowly lowered the receiver back into place while staring blankly ahead. Everything's going to be fine, he whispered quietly to himself. Back in the present, Arthur sat silently in his room. That memory still haunted him because now he understood the truth. That was how both Gray and Arthur survived painful moments, by telling themselves that everything would somehow work out, repeating comforting lies until they finally started believing them. Arthur slowly closed his eyes. It was a memory he would never forget. Dream or not, far below the floating castle, deep within the underground dungeon, the night remained cold and quiet. Gentry sighed tiredly. Tonight certainly turned out more eventful than expected. He stretched slightly before turning away. Make sure you finish wrapping things up early tonight, he said casually. I'd rather not spend another sleepless evening down here. With that, Gentry began walking down the corridor, but then a sound echoed from inside the retainer's prison cell. Ento froze instantly. The noise had been subtle. Then suddenly, something moved, fast, far too fast. A dark blur shot toward Ento from inside the cell. His eyes widened in terror. The bucket slipped from his hands while metal instruments clattered loudly throughout the dungeon corridor. Before Ento could even scream, the shadow was already upon him. Arthur descended the cold stone staircase toward the underground prison, adjusting the collar of his formal coat with visible discomfort. The neatly pressed black uniform felt stiff around his shoulders, and the polished boots echoed sharply against the dungeon steps. He hated wearing these formal clothes. They were restrictive, impractical, and far too rigid for someone constantly moving between battlefields. But after arriving late and underdressed to one too many council meetings, Virion had made his opinion painfully clear. If Arthur showed up looking like a wandering mercenary again, the commander would personally lecture him for an hour straight. So despite the irritation crawling beneath his skin, Arthur endured it. Only a few days had passed since his last dream of Gray's past life, yet the memory still lingered vividly in his mind. The strange conversation with Rodius refused to leave him alone. Ever since hearing that bizarre poem, fragments of Gray's old memories had begun surfacing more frequently, almost as if the words themselves had stirred something buried deep inside him. Arthur clenched his jaw slightly. Maybe the poem truly was connected somehow. Maybe Rodius knew something impossible. Or maybe the old traitor was simply insane. Arthur exhaled slowly as he continued down the dim corridor illuminated by flickering mana lamps. He hoped that this time, Rodius would stop speaking in riddles and finally explain himself directly. As he reached the final turn of the staircase, he noticed a guard stationed outside the prison corridor. The elf sat lazily beside the cell entrance, head tilted downward, apparently asleep. Arthur stared at him for a moment before sighing quietly. This guy really drifts off on duty a lot, he thought. A faint smirk tugged at Arthur's lips. Deciding to test him a little, Arthur carefully concealed his mana presence and silently stepped forward using the same stealth technique he once used to sneak past the hypersensitive raptor squirrels in Epheotis, creatures capable of sensing even the slightest disturbance in the air. Arthur moved without a sound, but the moment he came within reach, a blade instantly pressed against his neck. Arthur froze. The elf guard stood before him with frightening speed, sword drawn and eyes razor sharp. His sleepy appearance had vanished completely. Pure instinct radiated from him. Then recognition struck. The guard's eyes widened in horror. He immediately lowered his weapon and stepped back, bowing apologetically. My apologies. I sensed someone sneaking up behind me and reacted before thinking. Arthur raised an eyebrow. You reacted while asleep? The elf's face flushed with embarrassment. Please don't tell Commander Virion, he pleaded quickly. I only have a few more days of guard duty left. If I stay down here any longer, I'll have to start running laps on the wall just to stop my muscles from wasting away. Arthur couldn't help letting out a small chuckle. Relax. I'm not reporting you. The guard sighed in relief. Honestly though, Arthur admitted, Virion was right about your senses being exceptional. The elf grinned proudly at the compliment. These senses have saved my life more times than I can count. The guard sheathed his sword before asking, Are you here to visit another prisoner? Arthur shook his head. Same one. Then he glanced toward the deeper part of the corridor. Is Gentry inside? The elf snorted. There hasn't been a single moment when he wasn't inside. Arthur blinked. Wait. He sleeps down here too? The elf nodded immediately. With all the smell, blood, and screaming apparently. Both of them grimaced at the same time. That's disgusting, Arthur muttered. It really is. They continued their conversation as Arthur asked whether the elf at least had his own room, hopefully somewhere far away from these depths of despair. The elf let out a tired laugh and said that he did, but he still couldn't wait to finish his assignment there and finally return home. Arthur glanced at him curiously. You're not returning to the battlefield? The elf shook his head. I'm being reassigned to the forest. Then a faint smile crossed his face. That's what I meant by home. Arthur paused slightly. Their forest. The memory resurfaced immediately. The towering trees, the thick manna fog, the strange silence hidden beneath the forest's beauty. The first time Arthur entered El's Hire. He had only been a child, and it had been entirely by accident. The elf stopped walking for a second, clearly surprised. You? Arthur nodded. When I was younger. The guard stared at him in disbelief. Not many humans enter the forest and come back alive, he muttered. Much less a child. Arthur smiled faintly. I'll tell you the story someday if you tell me why you're getting demoted to guard duty. The elf instantly replied without hesitation, I guess we'll both never know. Arthur laughed quietly under his breath. Eventually, they reached a cluttered side room near the deepest cells of the prison. The elf pointed toward a hunched figure buried beneath papers, restraints, and scattered tools. There, he said. That's where he sleeps. Gentry suddenly jolted awake at the sound of footsteps. HM? What's going on? He fumbled around for his glasses before finally spotting Arthur standing at the doorway. The old torturer blinked. Well now, he muttered. To what do I owe the pleasure of the general disturbing my rest? Arthur crossed his arms. I was simply returning the favor from last night. Gentry let out a dry laugh. Fair enough. Arthur's expression quickly turned serious. I need you to open Rodius's cell. There's something I want to ask him. Gentry nodded immediately as he stood up. Of course. As they walked through the corridor, Gentry spoke again. And my apologies for dragging the entire council down here last night. Arthur glanced at him. You thought Rodius was finally going to reveal something important. I still think he might. Arthur remained silent for a moment. That's why I'm here. The deeper they walked, the colder the air became. Eventually, they arrived outside Yuto's reinforced containment chamber. Arthur frowned slightly. Something felt wrong. Gentry reached for the mechanism and slowly opened the chamber door. The moment it creaked open, dark smoke spilled into the hallway. Arthur's eyes narrowed instantly. Gentry froze. The elf guard immediately stepped forward with his sword drawn. As the smoke slowly cleared, the horrifying scene inside became visible. Entei collapsed on the floor. Blood seeped through the gaps in his suit as broken tools and overturned buckets scattered across the room. The entire chamber looked devastated. Black spikes of corrupted mana erupted violently from the ground and walls like twisted spears, tearing apart the prison floor. And in the middle of it all, Yuto sat slumped against the wall, barely conscious. Yet despite his condition, a twisted grin stretched across the retainer's face the moment he saw Arthur. Arthur's eyes widened slightly. That's impossible. The restraints were still active. Yuto's mana should have been completely sealed. Gentry immediately rushed toward the retainer, while the elf guard focused his senses outward. There's nobody else here, the elf reported sharply. I can't sense any intruders. Arthur stepped cautiously into the chamber, confusion growing rapidly. Did he somehow break free? Arthur muttered. But something felt off. Yuto wasn't escaping. He wasn't even moving properly. Then Arthur realized something far worse. Rodius. Arthur instantly turned and rushed toward the neighboring cell. The metal door stood partially open. Arthur reached it in seconds, and stopped cold. Rodius lay sprawled across the prison floor. Dark spikes had pierced completely through his body. Blood spread beneath him in thick crimson pools. His eyes were empty. Dead. For a brief moment, silence consumed the entire corridor. Arthur stared at the corpse in shock, his mind racing violently. Then Yuto laughed weakly from behind him. A slow, broken laugh filled with cruel amusement.